Welcome back to the Next.JS full stack project, where you can learn the core concept of the Next.js in a full stack project. This is the third episode of this series in which we are going to implement the edit real estate property feature in our real estate application. Also, the links of all episodes of this tutorial are in the description below. So now without further ado, let's get right into it. So in this section, we are going to add the edit functionality to our real estate application. So first, let me quickly show you what needs to be done here. Okay, I've already created a flowchart diagram which contains the steps that we need to take in order to implement the edit functionality in our application. So here in the first step, we need to create a dynamic route and then get the ID of the property that we want to edit from the params of the dynamic route. And then in the next step, we need to get the ID of the current signed in user, and then based on these two properties, we need to fetch the property with Prisma. And here in this step, we might have some errors. So first, let me explore the error path here. You can see we have two types of error. The first one is property not existed. So if the property is not existed, we can show a 404 message to user. We can redirect the user to a 404 page. And the other error that we might get here is that the user tries to edit the property that does not belong to itself. So it means that the user tries to update a property of another user. So we should not allow user to do this. Okay, so this is the error path of this flowchart. Before moving to the success path, let me change the shape of these two error messages. So there is a global standard for drawing a flowchart in which we need to set the shape of the IO messages to parallelograms. So here, let's select this and we can change the shape here to parallelogram. Okay, just let me copy this and paste it here in the unauthorized message. And then we are going to go to the success path here. If we don't have any error in fetching the property, we need to path the property into the add property form. Here we don't want to create another form for updating the property. We want to use the add property form for adding a new property as well as the updating or editing an existing property. So here we need to pass the property to the add property form, and then inside the form we need to fill up inputs with the data of the property. And then in the picture section we need to load and show the property images. Okay, now the user can update the property data and also add some new images in the picture section, and also the user might delete some of the old images of the property. After that, we need to submit the form. So here in the submit section of the form, first we need to upload the new images of the property to the Supabase, and then we need to create a list of the deleted images. So as I said, the user can delete some of the old images of the property, so we need to keep track of them. And then here in the next section, we need to call the server action. We pass the data about the updated property. We need to pass the URLs of new uploaded images, and also we need to pass the list of images ID that the user deleted from the property. And inside the server action, we can use the Prisma client update API and update the property data, and also insert the URLs of the new images into our database. And then we need to delete the images from the property image table that their ID is inside the deleted images list that we have passed to the server action. And then if everything is okay, we can toast a proper message to user, for example, success message. So these are the steps that we need to take in the edit property section. And now we can go back to the VS Code and start working on the first step of this diagram. So now let's get back to the VS Code, and the first thing we need to do here is to create a dynamic route inside the properties route. So essentially we need to get the ID of the property that we want to update in the params of the route. So here, let me create a dynamic route in the properties directory. I'm going to call it ID. It is the params of the dynamic route. And inside it, we're going to create another directory. I'm going to call it edit. Okay. And then here we can create our page.tsx. Okay. So inside the page, we're going to create a server component. Okay, I'm going to call the page edit property page. Okay, now here we need to define an interface for this edit property page. So let's remove this line. We don't want that. And here I'm going to say interface and call it props. Here inside it, we need to get the ID params from the route handler. So we need to have a params property here in the props that contains the ID, which is going to be a string. Okay, so the params should be params. The spelling and the name is important here. And we put ID here because in the dynamic route, we have put the ID inside the square brackets, which means that the name of the params is ID. So we need to put the ID inside the params in the props interface. And then here, now we can access to the params. So first we need to set the type of the props to the props interface that we have just created. And then here we can grab the params out of the props of the component. So in this way we can access to the ID params of this dynamic route. Okay, now that we have access to the ID of the property that we want to update, we first need to fetch the property from the database and then show it inside the add property page. So we can use the Prisma, which is coming from our global Prisma client that we have created in the lib directory. And then I'm going to use the property model and then find unique function. Okay, then here inside the find unique, we need to specify the where API. Okay, so inside the where API, we're going to say that we want the property that its ID equals to params.id. Okay, so it will give us an error, and that's because the ID inside the database is a number, but the params.id is always a string. So we need to turn it to a number, and I put a plus before it, and it will turn it to a number. Note that here the params here comes from the props of the component. Then we also need to include the other related model of the property. So here we need to specify the include API, and inside it we're gonna set the location to true because we want to fetch the location of the property as well. In the same way, we need to set the feature to true. Also, we need to do the same for the contact model. We also need the contact data of these properties, so I set it to true. And then also we need to fetch the images of this property, so we need to set it to true. Okay, so it will give us an object that contains the basic data of the property as well as the location, feature, contact, and images of the property inside it. So as you might notice here, I haven't used the await keyword before the Prisma find unique function, and that's because I'm going to resolve this function, which is a promise, inside a promise.all function. So what's the point of this, you might be asking? That's because since we are going to finally pass the property to the add property page, we also need to fetch and pass list of the property status and property type from our database to the add property page. So we need to fetch these two lists with the Prisma. So instead of fetching them in a serial approach, we're going to fetch them in a parallel approach with the promise.all. And that's why I haven't used the await keyword. So here I just use a promise.all function. So first we need to turn this component to an async component. Okay, now we can use the await keyword here. So I'm going to say const and define a list here. Okay, so for now let it to be empty. We're going to fill it in a second, but here in order to set it, we need to use the await keyword and then call the promise.all function. Okay, so inside the promise.all function, we need to pass our promises without the await keyword. I mean, we need to pass unresolved promises in a list to this promise.all function. So here I'm going to add a list here, and inside the list, we are going to cut this function find unique, okay, and paste it here as one of the promises that we want to be resolved in the promise.all. Okay, so before the find unique function, we're going to put two more promises, one for the fetching the property types from our database and the other for fetching the property status from our database as well. So here I'm going to put Prisma that property type that find many function. So in this way, we're going to say that we want to fetch all of the property type from our database. Okay, and in the next promise that we want to set inside this promise.all list, we're going to say Prisma dot property status dot find many. Okay, so again, in this way, we are fetching all the property statuses from our database. So let's save this to break it into multiple line. So the first promise is for fetching the property types, the second for property status, and the last one is for fetching the property itself. Okay, so now we can get the resolved object of our promise. So we need to put them respectively here. The first one is going to be property types, so I'm going to name it property types. Okay, the second one is going to be property statuses. So here put a ES after that, and the third one is going to be our property. So I just call it property. Okay, so these are just name of the variables. You can name them whatever you want. Okay, so now after getting the result objects here, we need to return the add property form. So here, let's remove this div from the JSX and just add a add property form. Okay, so you might notice here we are going to handle the update or edit property inside the add property form. We don't want to create another form for updating the property. Okay, so here inside the add property form, first we need to pass the types that we've got from our database. So I set it to property types. We need to pass the statuses. So I set it to property statuses. And then here we need to add two more props to the add property form. So first I go to the add property form, and here inside the props interface of the add property form, we need to specify a property prop. So here I'm going to say property, okay, and then we need to set it to optional because we only want to set these props inside the edit property page. We don't want to set these props in the add property form. Okay, so I set it to optional here, and then here we can just easily set its props to the property that comes from the Prisma client. But here, if I hover on this property, you can see it just contains the basic information of the property. So if I go back to the diagram of our database, you can see the property table only contains the basic data of the property. We also need the property images, property contact, property feature, and also property location data of the property, and we need to somehow include these data inside the property props. Okay, so we can't just easily set its type to the property because, as I just said, it just contains the property table data. Okay, so here we need to set it to Prisma with the uppercase, which comes from the Prisma client. So if I go to the top of this file, you can see the Prisma is coming from the Prisma client. So let's get back to the props interface, and here with this Prisma, we can call the property get payload type. Then here in the generics, we can specify the includes and set the location to true. Also, we need to do the same with the contact. Okay, I'm going to set it to true. We need to set the feature as well to true, and we also need to set the images to true. Okay, we don't need to set the types and status of the property to true because we have the property type ID and property status ID already inside the property model. If I hover on the property now, you can see now it contains the location object, contact object, feature, and images, and it also has the basic data of the property. Okay, so now after the property type, we need to add another props, which is going to be isEdit, which determines whether the form is being used for editing an existing property or adding a new property. Okay, we need to set it to optional because we only want to set these props in the edit property page. We don't want to set it in the add property page. So we need to set it to optional and set its type to Boolean. Okay, and here inside the add property form, we need to set a default value for this isEdit prop. So here we can use an object destructuring here. We're going to extract the isEdit and set its default value to false. Okay, and then we can put the rest of the props into the props object. Okay, so we have just extract the isEdit and put the rest of the props into the props interface. Now we can get back to the edit page, and here we can specify the property prop. So say property and set it to property object that we've got from the Prisma client. Okay, and this will gives us an error, and that's because this property might be null, but this property props doesn't take the null value. So here, before the returning the add property form, we can check if the property is not null, then just render a add property form and then pass the property to it. Okay, so let's save this, and now we need to set the isEdit to true. Okay, so we're done here. Now we need to go to the add property form again, and here we need to set the default values of the fields inside the form when the isEdit property is true. So here I go to the use form, and here after setting the resolver, we need to specify the default values. Okay, I set it to an object, and here we can set the contact, for example, to the props.property.contact, and in case it is undefined, we can just return undefined. Okay, and here we can do the same for the location. So let's just copy that and put it here. So we need to just set the property location here. Okay, the next one is going to be property feature. Let's paste the previous expression, and here need to set it to property.feature. Okay, the next one is going to be the description of the property. So we need to set it to property.description. Again, do the same for the name property and set it to props.property.name. Again, we're going to do the same for the price. Okay, status ID, set it to property.status ID and type ID, and also set it to property.type ID. Okay, so in this way we can set the default values of the React hook form. Okay, now we need to go to all of these sub forms here, and for each input we need to set the default value. So I go back to the basic form, and here first we need to extract the getValues function from the use form context. So I just extract it here, and now we can go to the first input, which is going to be name, and I'm going to set the default value to the getValues function. Okay, and then from the returning object of the getValue, we just grab the name. Just save this, and let's go back to our browser. Let's click on the edit property for this property. You can see it goes to the user/properties, and then it is the proms, which is the ID of the property, and then call the edit page. Okay, so as you can see here, the name of the property is already inside the name input. Awesome. So let's get back to the VS Code and do the same for the others input in the form. Okay, let's get back to the description here and just copy the default value here and paste it here, and we just need to set it to getValues.description. Okay, and then for the next input, which is a select input, here we need to set the default selected keys here. Okay, and here we need to pass a list of the default selected keys. So let's add a list here and call the getValues function inside it, and then call the type ID. Okay, we need to set it to string here. Let's save this and let's get back to the browser. Okay, let's get back to the properties page and then click on the edit. So the description is set, but here the type is not set. So let's get back to the VS Code and just call the toString function from this type ID. Okay, and let's get back to the browser. Let's refresh the page. Now you can see the type is set. Okay, so let's do the same for the status select. Let's get back to VS Code. Just copy this line, go to the status select option and set its default selected keys to a list which contains the getValues function .status ID.toString. Okay, let's get back to the browser. Let's refresh the page. You can see now the status is set, and lastly we need to set the price default value. Let's get back to VS Code. Here inside the price input, you can specify the default value and set it to getValues function .price. It will give us an error, and that's because the default value should be a string, but the price is a number. So we need to call the toString function here. And now if I go back to the browser and refresh the page, you can see now the price is set inside this form. Okay, now let's get back to the location form, and here let's first extract the getValues function from the use form context, and then here in the inputs, and the first input, we need to set the default value and set it to getValues function, and from the returning object we need to grab the location street address. Okay, let's copy that and go for the next one, which is for the zip code, and here we just need to bind the location.zip. Go for the city, and here just bind the location.city. Go for the location.state and set the default value to location.state here. Next one is going to be the location.region. Okay, just set it to location.region. And next one is the landmark. So I just put the location.landmark in the default value object. And let's save this, get back to the browser and go to the next input. As you can see now, the default values are set inside their corresponding inputs. Okay, now let's get back to the features form. Here inside the features form, let's set the default value to get values function. So first we need to extract the get values from the use form context, and here we need to set it to get values dot features, property feature actually, dot bedrooms dot toString. Okay, let's just copy this line and go to the next one. Here we just need to set it to property feature dot bedrooms. Okay, go to the next one and just set the default value to the property feature dot parking spots. The next one is going to be area, so just change it to area here. Okay, and the next three ones are checkboxes. So the first checkbox is the property that has swimming pool. So as you can see, we have already set the default value to false, but here we need to check if the get values has a value for the has swimming pool inside it. Then we're gonna set it to this value. Otherwise, we can just set it to false, which is its initial default value. So here we're gonna call the get values function and just grab the property feature that has swimming pool, and here we can put a ternary operator on that. So here we can say if it is true, set the default value to true, otherwise just set the default value to false. So let's save this and do the same for the other two checkboxes. Here the default values, let's put it here. So let's replace the default values here. Okay, we just need to change the has swimming pool to has garden yard. Okay, now let's go to the next checkbox. Just replace the default value and just change the has swimming pool here to has balcony. Okay, let's save this and everything works correctly here. So let's get back to the features form, and as you can see here, we have the data inside the inputs, and here in the checkboxes, since the default values of all these checkboxes are false, you can see they are not checked. Okay, now we can go to the pictures form, and here we need to load the saved images of this property and show them here, and then we can delete some of the saved images and also add the new images if we want to add some new images for this property. Okay, now let's get back to the VS Code, and here inside the add property form, you can see we have already created an images state for keeping the image files that has been selected by the user to be uploaded. And then here when we render the picture component, we pass the images and set images to it. Okay, inside the picture component, you can see we have the images and set images in the props. And here inside this container div, we render the images inside this container. And here in the file input, you can see we add new selected image to the images state with the set images function that comes from the props. So now we need to create another state for keeping the saved images URL. I mean the images that has been already saved in our database for the property. So now let me show you real quick in a diagram that's why we need to create such an extra state for keeping the saved images URL of the property. So I have created this diagram for explaining why we need two lists for editing the property images. So here we have the images. We are going to put the new images that the user chooses to upload for the property. So images inside this list at the end will be uploaded to our database. But here the property might have some images in our database. So first we need to fetch the images and put them inside the saved images list. We should not put them inside the images because they are already uploaded into our server and we don't want to upload them again. And here note that the user might want to delete some of the already images from the property. So we need to keep track of the deleted images inside the saved images list and then at the end delete them from our database. So let's show them in the diagram. Here, as I said, we need to keep track of the deleted images from the saved images list, and then then at the end delete them from our database. Okay, so let's put a label here, delete some images. So this diagram is kind of showing the role of the images list and saved images list. I hope that makes sense to you. So now let's get back to the VS Code and create the state for keeping the saved images URL. So I go to the add property form, and below the images state we need to create the state. Okay, so I copy the state here, and we just need to rename it to saved images URL, and also rename the mutation function to the set saved images URL. And here we need to change the type of this state to a list of property images type that comes from the Prisma client. Okay, now we need to go to the pictures component, and here inside the props we need to define two props for saved images URL and set images URLs function. So here I'm going to say saved images URL and set it to optional here, because we only want to set this prop when we are on the edit stage. We don't want to set it in the add a new property stage. Okay, so let's set the type to the property image, and we're going to have a list of them. Now let's define the set saved image URL. It is going to be optional as well for the same reason, and we're going to set its type to a function that takes a list of property images. So let's set the type of the parameter to a list of property images. Okay, and then it returns nothing. So here inside the div container of the images, we first need to render the saved images of the property. Okay, so here let's just copy that and let's paste it here. We need to change it to saved images URL. Okay, since this is a optional props that might be undefined, and this causes the error here, so we need to check if the props that saved images URL is existed. So first we need to turn it to a boolean, so that's why I put a double exclamation mark here. That will turn the object to a boolean, and here we can safely use the logical AND operator. Okay, so as you can see, the error is gone, and we don't need to create a URL for this image because the image has been already uploaded to the Supabase. So just need to put the image object dot URL as the key for picture card, or we can just use image URL.id, since this object has an ID that is set by the database. Inside the src, we're going to set it to image.url, which is the public URL of the image inside the Supabase bucket. Okay, we need to set the index, since the picture card needs to take the image as the props, and here in the onDelete we need to filter the saved images URL. So here we need to use the set saved images URL. It immediately gives us an error, and that's because these props might be undefined. So here we need to check its availability. So I'm going to say props.set images URL, turn it to a boolean, and then use the logical AND operator. The error still is there, so we can just actually put a exclamation mark here to emphasize that this is going to be available here. We can just copy this here and here turn it to a boolean and use the AND operator, and then we can just remove this exclamation mark here, and here we need to remove that logic, and here we just use the props that saved images URL that filter, and then here we can map through the images inside it, and we're going to say just return the image that its ID does not equal to image, which is this image here on the map function .id. Okay, so in this way we will actually remove this image if the delete button is clicked inside the picture card. And here we have an error, and that's because since the filter function returns a list, we don't want this list. So we remove that and save this. We have another error here, and it's complaining about this saved URL might be undefined. So since we have already checked the availability of the saved images URL here, we can safely use a exclamation mark to emphasize that is not going to be undefined here. So in this way we can remove a picture from the saved images URL when the delete button inside the picture card is clicked. Okay, so if I get back to the VS Code, you can see the images of the property that already has been saved in our database doesn't show up here. And that's because we need to take two more steps here. I go to the add property form here and go to the saved images URL state, and here you can see we have set the initial value of this state to just an empty list. So we need to set it to property.images. So here, instead of this empty list, I'm going to set it to props.property.images, and in case this is undefined, we just render a empty list. So let's save this, and here we need to go to the picture component, and we need to pass the state and its mutation function to this component. And here I'm going to put them conditionally. Actually, we want to say that if the property object is available here, it means that we are on the edit state, then set these two props. So here put a curly braces here, and inside it we're going to put a parenthesis. We can check the props.property availability. I'm going to turn it to a boolean and then use logical AND operator. So if the property is available here, I'm going to put an object that contains set save images URL and set its value to set saved images URL. And above that, let's set the save images URL props and set it to saved images URL, and put a comma here to remove the error. And here we need to just use the spread operator. So in this way we can conditionally set some props of the component based on a condition, which here is the availability of the props.property. If it is not undefined, we set these two props, and if it is undefined, we don't set these two props at all. Okay, so now if I go back to the browser, you can see now we have the saved images of the property here in the pictures form, and we can also upload new images in our picture form, and we can delete a new image or also a saved image here. Add another one. You can see everything works correctly here. So we're done with the picture form in this section, and now we can move to the contact form and adjust it for editing an existing property. So we need to go back to the VS Code, and I go to the contact form. So here, choose the contact here, and first we need to extract the getValues function from the useForm context, and here inside the inputs we need to set the default value. So here in the default value, I'm going to use the getValues function, and we can call it without any parameter, and then from the returning object just grab whatever property that we want, or we can here pass the property name, and it will essentially return just that property, not a whole object. So here we need to get the value of the contact.name, and that will just return the value of this property, not the whole object of the property. Okay, so I think that might be more efficient. So let's go ahead with this approach in this contact form, and let's do it with the phone inputs. Just pass the contact.phone, and I think I forgot to put a ending curly braces here. Just copy that and go for the email and just pass the contact.email in the getValues function. Okay, now we're done with the contact form here. And if I get back to the browser, you can see that the form is already filled up with the contact data of the property. And now the user can click on the save here. The form is submitted, and we need to take some steps in the onSubmit event of the form. Okay, now I go to the flowchart diagrams here. In the submit form section, first we need to upload the new images and then create a list of the deleted images. So now let's get back to the VS Code, and here inside the add property form, we need to go to the onSubmit function. So here in the first step, we are uploading the new images with the upload images function and pass the images list. So we have already taken the first step in this section, which is uploading the new images of the property and get their public URLs back. So in the next step inside the try catch block, we need to check the isEdit flag. So here I'm going to check that with a if statement. If isEdit is true, it means that we are currently on the edit mode and we need to follow the edit property scenario. Otherwise, it means that we're dealing with the scenario of adding a new property. So here, let's add a block here and put the save property function and also the toast inside the else block. So here, let's get back to the if statement, our edit mode scenario. Here in the second step, we need to find the ID of the deleted images. So here we're going to define a constant variable, const. I'm going to call it deleted image, IDs, and here we're going to grab the images property from the property props. So here we're going to say props.property.images, and then we're going to use the filter method here, and this images array. And this filter, as you might know, acts like a strainer, keeping only the items that pass a test. So the test here is pretty straightforward. We're going to pass a callback to it, item, and inside this callback we're going to check if the item is not exist inside the saved images URL. So here first we're going to put a exclamation mark, which means not here, and then use the save images URL list and call the includes function and then pass the item inside it. So note that here in the first point that we are loading this form, we initialize the saved images URLs with the property images. So these two lists here, the property.images and save the images URL, at first time contain the same items, and then the user can delete some images from the saved images URL. So this code here actually sifts through the property images and keep those images that are not found inside the saved images URL. So now the deleted images IDs contains the list of images that are deleted from the saved images URL. So since we only want the IDs of these images, we can again map through the returning list, and then here just get the item, and then inside the callback we just return item.id. So now the returning list of this statement contains the IDs of the deleted images. I hope that makes sense to you. So now let's get back to the browser. You can see we have taken the second step in this flowchart, and then we need to call the server action for editing the property. So since we haven't created this server action, we need to go to the actions directory inside the lib directory, and here in the property.ts file, which contains the server actions about the property, we need to create the edit property server action. So here I'm going to export an async function. I'm going to call it edit property, and then here let's go to the save property and just copy these two arguments. We don't want the user ID, we want the property ID and images URLs. So let's put them here. Let's save this and let's add a body block for the function. Now we have the property data and we have the images URLs. We also need deleted image IDs, which is going to be a list of strings here. And then in the first place here, before the property data, we need the property ID, which is going to be a number. Okay, now let's save this, and here inside the body of the function, first we need to call the update function of the Prisma client. So here I'm going to say const result and then call the Prisma.property.update. Okay, and then pass the configuration object inside it. First we need to specify which property that we want to edit. So we're going to specify the where API here and say the ID must be equal to property ID parameter. Okay, now we need to specify the data here. First we need to set the basic data of the property here. So I'm going to say name equals to property data.name, then price equals to property data.price. Okay, the next one is going to be status ID, is going to be property data.status ID. We're going to put the type ID here and set it to property data.type ID. Okay, and in the next one we're going to specify the description, which is going to be property data.description. Okay, now we need to update the contact information. So here we're going to say contact, set it to an object, call the update API here, and just spread the property data.contact. And the next one is going to be property feature. So here we're going to specify the feature, and inside it again we're going to call the update API and just spread the property data.property feature. Okay, and in the next one we are going to update the location. So I'm going to say location, and inside it again call the update API and just spread the property data.location. Okay, and here we need to update the images of the property. So here specify the images, and here we can't just simply call the update API. first we need to insert the new images into the images table, and then we need to delete the images that their ID exists inside the deleted images URL. So first we need to call the create API here, and inside it we're going to map through the new images URL. So let's get back to the parameter list of this edit property function. Let's rename this to new images URL. So this is a better name and describes this list better. Let's get back to the images here, and then since we have a one-to-many relationship from the property table to the property images, we need to pass a list of images to this create object here. So it means that one property can have multiple images. So that's why we need to pass a list of images here. So in order to do that, we can go up to the save property server action and just copy this section, okay, and then get back here to the create object of the images inside the edit property, then paste it here. So here we just need to rename these images URLs to the parameter in the edit property, which is new images URLs. So let's copy that, just get back here and paste it here. Okay, so in this map function, we are actually creating a list of objects that contains a URL inside them. Okay, and after inserting the new images into the property images, we need to delete the images that their ID is inside the deleted images ID. So here, after the create API, we can specify delete many, and inside it, we need to specify that in order for an image to be deleted, its ID must be inside the deleted images ID. So here, we specify the ID here and pass it to an object, and then inside it, we can specify the in property and then pass the deleted images ID. And we have an error here, and that's because the deleted images ID is a list of strings, but the ID of the image property must be number. Okay, so that's why we have an error here. We need to go back and turn the ID inside this list to numbers. So here, first we need to change the type of the deleted images ID to number. Okay, and here let's just rename it to deleted images IDs since this is a list. Okay, so now we can go back down to the deleted many, and you can see the error is gone. Okay, so now we're done with the update API of the Prisma. So we can now log the result here. So put result inside a console.log, and then we can return the result from this server action. Okay, and now we can go back to the add property form, and here in the onSubmit function and inside the edit property scenario, after getting the IDs of the deleted images, we can now call the edit property server action. So here I'm going to say await and then call the edit property. First we need to pass the property ID, so I'm going to get it from the props.property.id. In the next one, we're going to pass the data, which is the data that we've got from the inputs. And the next one, we are going to pass the new images URLs, which is these images URLs here. So I pass it here as the third parameter. And then in the last one, we need to pass the deleted image IDs. Okay, so now here we have an error in the property.id, and that's because the props.property might be undefined. So here in the if statement, we're going to double check the availability of the props.property. So I'm going to say is edit and props.property. Okay, so here as you can see, the error is gone, and we are actually assuring the TypeScript that this props.property here in this line always will be available. And if the property is undefined, then we never enter the if statement block in the first place. So after that, we can raise a toast here. For example, we can say toast.success function and pass some success message. For example, let's say property updated. Okay, and I think we're done here. And here, after the try catch block inside the onSubmit function, we have a redirect function. But since this is a client component, we can't use the redirect function here. We can just use this function inside the server actions and the server component. So we need to use the useRouter hook to push the user after editing or adding a new property. So here I go all the way up to the top of the component, and here in the first line, I'm going to define a router and set it to use router that comes from the next/navigation. Okay, and then get back to the onSubmit function, and here inside the finally block, we can use the router object and call the push function from it and push the user to the /user/property. So now let's get back to the browser, and here, for example, let's say we want to edit the first property. I click on that, just put a number after each input, and here let's change the type to apartment, status to sold, and let's change the price. Okay, and click on the next. Here let's put a number after each input. Okay, and then click on the next, put a number here, and here click on the next, delete some of the images and upload a new image. For example, let's import this one. Okay, and click on the next, and here let's just save the property. We can see the toast here property updated. Okay, as you might see here in the first place, for just a few seconds, the name of the property didn't change, and that because the caching system of the Next.js. Okay, so if I refresh the page, you can see the updated version of the property is now on the list. Okay, click on the edit property here, you can see that all the inputs are changed. Go to the next one and go to the next one, and as you can see, the list of images is now changed. And yeah, that's it for the overall procedure of updating an existing property in our application. We're not completed yet. We still need to implement the authentication authorization in this page, which we are going to cover in the next video. But here in this video, now you've learned how you can update an existing entity in your database with the help of the server actions and the Prisma client. So yeah, in the next video, we are going to implement the authentication, which means that we are going to prevent the unauthenticated user to reach this page in the first place, and then we are going to implement the authorization, which means that we are going to prevent the users from updating a property which does not belong to them. So if you've learned something new in this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. That will help me to grow my channel, and I really appreciate your support. And also, in order to get informed about the next video, please hit the bell button. Have a nice time. Stay tuned for my next video. Bye bye.